This is Beer in Front, part of the Beer Media Group. Every week I'll talk to people in and around the beer world and get their stories all about beer. That's Beer in Front, and it's coming up now. Welcome to episode 235 of Beer in Front. I'm your host, Dave Zalatoris, and Beer in Front is a charter member of the Beer Media Group. I have a good show for you today. I'm talking to Joel Alex over at Blue Ox Malthouse. They're located in Maine, and they provide malt to all sorts of world-class breweries, distilleries, and bakeries, so stay tuned for that. You may have noticed something was a little different in the intro. I have left the Odd Pods Media Network. I love all the people that are there, but I want to start pursuing this Beer Media Group a little bit more. So I'm flying solo now. So I'm not to say there's not going to be ads in the future, but for the time being, please enjoy this ad-free experience of Beer in Front. I hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. Ruby and I had a good time. We went to Costco. They had everything all done. $40. The turkey, the green beans, the stuffing, the mashed potatoes, little cups of cranberry. Throw it in the oven, hour and a half, hour and 40 minutes later, you were good to go. So keep that in mind for next year if you have a small family like we do. $40 and hey, in the cart it went. Good couple shows lined up for you. Next week, I'm going to talk all about the American Craft Beer Hall of Fame. So that should be good. Stay tuned for that next week. I'm on vacation this week and I have a ton of interviews lined up to hit record on, so there's going to be a good month of episodes coming out, so please subscribe if you haven't already, so you could always catch the latest edition of Beer in Front. Also, be sure to follow me over on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube. Follow me there at Beer in Front. I'll post some videos of, various beer reviews, and on Monday, I'm putting out a special quick little video, so you'll have to follow me and keep an eye out for that on Monday. In beer and beverage news, Ravinia Brewing Company, they've announced they're gonna have a new name. Their new name will be Steep Ravine Brewing Company. They put out a press release. The nonsense with the music festival is over with, thankfully, and they can continue making great beer. But there is some bad news about this, that the location in the city in Logan Square, they're going to close on December 14th. They're still going to continue to brew there, but the brew pub itself is going to close, and they'll keep the Highland Park one open. So I'm glad for Steep Ravine. I'm glad all this shit's behind them and they can continue on, but I'm sad that was a great location over on Diversey that I love going to. I loved the food that was there, so I'm sorry to see that go, but I wish them all the success in the world, and now they could just focus on making great beer. And also out of Chicago, Molson Coors, they acquired Cruz Blanca, which, this came out the day before Thanksgiving, so it's kind of a news dump, so it was kind of surprising to a lot of people, but Molson Coors has bought them. The owner and the head brewer are staying on, according to the article that I'm reading over on Brewbound, and also the owners are going to continue having the brew pub, and I guess they're going to license the IP now from Molson Coors, so it was kind of surprising, but Molson Coors is the new owner of Cruz Blanca. In January, President-elect Trump promised that he's going to put a 25% tariff on all imported goods from Canada, from Mexico. Also, there's going to be an additional 10% on China. This is going to affect alcohol consumption. You get a lot of people buying Mexican beer, brands like Corona, Pacifico, Modelo. How's that going to affect them? Also, you have tequila that's made there, Canadian whiskey. So the price of certain things might be going up in January. All right, welcome back. Blue Ox Malthouse has been in operation since 2013. Their 20,000 square foot facility is the largest of its kind in the world outside of Europe. Blue Ox Malthouse is a 100% floor malting company that provides grain for the finest brewing, distilling, and baking companies across the Northeast. Joining me today is Joel Alex, founder of Blue Ox Malthouse. Joel, thank you so much for taking time out to talk about malt today.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Dave. I'm excited to share a little bit about what we do and hopefully answer some questions and provide some new information.
Why start a malt house?
It's a good question. Prior to this, my background was all professional background was teaching and trail access community organization in rural Maine. So my academic background was in environmental studies, like international policy. So it wasn't an obvious choice to go into malting. But after college, I worked in rural Maine doing that kind of trail access development work. And a lot of my friends were farming or were somehow involved in agriculture or food. And I was continuing to kind of look at sustainable development and what that meant for my region and what that looked like. And, was just paying attention. I made a lot of food, I did a lot of fermentation at home. And I just saw this like opportunity in the food system where we had all this grain that was leaving our state and all this malted grain that was being imported, and we were kind of losing the economic value of that. And I basically had the dangerous initially the thought I was talking to a craft brewer, one of the OGs at Oak Pond Brewing in Maine, which is a great little craft brewery that goes back to the 90s. In Maine, very rural, very up there, very out. If you've been to Maine, you probably haven't heard of them, but they're still there. They're good. They're outside of Skowhegan. And yeah, it was just at that moment, Adam was like, their head brewer was like, yeah, we can't use any local grain because nobody's malting it. And I was like, somebody has to do that. That's brilliant. That's amazing. Well, it's amazing that no one's doing that. And then it would be an amazing thing to do. I was in the process of going to grad school to study kind of rural economic development. But once I kind of got that all out of the way, I was like, well, what would I want to do with this degree? And I was like, I want to do something like this. What if I just tried to do it? Yeah. And at the time, there were only maybe 4 or 5 other craft malt houses in the country to look at. Valley Malt down in Massachusetts, Riverbend down in North Carolina, Colorado Malting in Colorado. So there's a few of them out there, but not very many of us.
Yeah, you would think, it's perfect. The area that you're in is ideal with so many great breweries there that it would make sense for, breweries to use locally sourced products.
When I started working on this in 2012, I was like, there's so many breweries. We've got 33 breweries in the state of Maine. I know I don't have to. I actually don't. There's brewing licenses. There's over 200 now, but I think some of those are like multiple tasting rooms and tap rooms. But I don't actually know the amount of breweries that are currently operating in the state of Maine. I feel like I should, but I don't. But it's approaching 200, I believe. So yeah. Anyway, well, at the time there was like 33. And I was like, there's so many, and they're importing, millions of pounds of malted grain. But I think one of the things that really made Maine interesting for the Northeast and what made me kind of believe that this was possible here is that we have a potato growing industry in the northern part of the state where you see a scale of agriculture that you really don't see in the Northeast until you get maybe down to northern New York and Pennsylvania. And down there, it's a lot of corn, but corn doesn't really grow well up in northern Maine. And we have that potato culture. And as part of that culture, there's a grain rotation. And since around 2000, Canada malting started to put some contracts for grain out of northern Maine. So there's malting barley being grown in Maine that was just going to Canada. And then anybody who wanted to use it was buying back a blend through BSG, distribution center in New York. So it just seemed like I don't know, it seemed like Maine was right to just bring it all home.
I was looking at your website earlier, and one thing that I noticed is that you try to, at least, if not all of your grains, come from local area farmers. Was this always part of the plan, like part of your mission statement when starting Blue Ox?
It was, because basically, as I was talking about before, one of the motivating factors for me was trying to figure out a way to support working landscapes in Maine and support my friends, because I had so many friends who were doing agriculture, and I had some friends who were doing grain specifically because we were just starting to get some local grist mills and excitement around local grain for baking and milling in the state. So I knew I didn't want to farm. That wasn't like my place in the story. But I wanted to figure out how to provide accessible premium mid-sized markets for these farms that are really small compared to out west. For example, I think some of the recent data, these are approximate numbers, is that we have about like 54,000 acres of potatoes in Maine in any one season. In rotation with those potatoes, you can, equate that there's an equivalent or similar amount of acres in grains or small grains. And I met somebody. I'm part of the National Barley Improvement Committee with the American Malting Barley Association. I've worked with them a couple years. Sit down with a farmer from North Dakota, and he talks about his 50,000 acre farm, and I'm like, okay, you got as much acreage on your farm as we have in Maine. And I bring that up only because the economy of scale is really different here. Creating grain and growing grain in Maine has a different cost than growing grain in North Dakota. And in order for these farmers to increase the viability of their farms, to really see benefit from growing this grain and making a high quality grain that brewers can use, you have to be able to pay them a premium. If they're getting the commodity market, if they're getting paid what it costs somebody in North Dakota to make their grain, they're losing money. So I wanted to kind of change that.
Now, you use at Blue Ox floor malting. What's the difference between floor malting and how other malt houses manufacture their malt?
Sure. Well, your most, or at least many of your listeners probably already know something about the malting process, but like quick review for anyone who doesn't, malting is basically an ingredient. I think everyone listening to this podcast probably knows that.
If not, keep listening. Yeah, I take all the listeners I can get.
Yeah. But the process is taking live grain, soaking it in water, getting it hydrated, then letting it germinate and grow, and then baking that grain down in order to kind of get rid of some flavors, add color, depending on the temperature you bake it down at. And, to put it simply for anyone who hasn't made a connection, it's basically, we do that because if you take raw grain and you add hot water, you get a porridge like oatmeal. You don't get that fermentable liquid that the yeast can then use. So there are, and just like with brewing or any process, you can apply different methods. You have those 3 steps. Those are always the 3 steps of malting. Whether you have a floor malting or a pneumatic malting system, it's always those 3 steps are happening. But in our process, what we do a little differently is that we take that germination step where the grain is growing and modifying over, say, 4 or 5 days. And we're doing that on concrete malting floors, as they historically did a lot in Scotland in the distilleries. They still, many of your listeners, I'm sure, have know of or have used, floor malted Czech pills or worked with some of Environment's floor malted products. But it's not something that's really been done in North America very much. So right now, I think we have like 11,000 square feet of like malting floor, which I'm pretty sure is the most, the largest amount of malting floor uh, in North America. So but we do have some good competitors that friendly competition with the guys out at Admiral for that. So
Yeah.
do you have to shout out to them?
Well, doing like floor malting, I would think that uses less automation and it's more of a personal hands-on approach to the grain itself. That has to make a difference in the taste and quality of what you're getting from Blue Ox, correct?
I mean, we believe so. Yeah,
Okay.
we definitely. I mean, that last part, we certainly believe that.
Yeah.
And as far as the process this goes, it is. I mean, I like to say that we have, we combine modern technology with like the traditional floor malting because it is that germination step on the floor that makes us a floor maltster. That said, we have steep tanks. We're using modern steeping techniques. 100 years ago, they would soak barley for 2 weeks in a large cistern, not change the water, things like that. We don't do any of that. We use modern steeping techniques to get a nice, like clean, bright flavor. The malt help clean the grain that we're using, and then we will transfer it manually onto the floors, and then over the course of 4 days, every few hours, one of my staff members are in there turning the malt over because it's starting to grow rootlets. There's some heat buildup. And one of the things that I think really makes floor malt stand out is it's really gentle on the grain while it's hydrated and growing. And that's when the grain is most fragile. The pneumatic malting, the sort of alternative that we see in most places in North America, is it's all mechanized. It's all augers moving it. That can be really hard on the grain when it's being like rushed through these mechanical processes. We have a malting rake we designed. We just have a turner we designed. It's very gentle on the grain. Keeps the embryo happy and whole during that process. And yeah, because we are interacting with it every few hours over the course of that germination, there's no set and forget. We're constantly smelling and feeling and seeing what's happening with the grain, which allows us to make a lot of modifications multiple times throughout the day. There's no set and forget, and we'll adjust or we'll lengthen the germination time or otherwise sort of adjust something if we're not really seeing what we want. So it creates a really nice, well modified, clean tasting. Oh, I keep saying clean tasting, but I just mean like we're not getting like a lot of vegetal or other kind of like flavors that you wouldn't hope. Sometimes you want them, but most of the time you're hoping not to have that. And one thing that does make us also a little different with just the floor malting piece is, I mean, we do that all in climate controlled spaces. So it's one of the reasons why we're sort of like modern floor malting. Again, looking way back, you'd see the floor maltings in like the old Scottish distilleries. They would just open windows on either side and hope to get a breeze going through to kind of lower the temperatures. But we do a lot because malting is all this temperature and moisture. After grain selection, you are just trying to help that grain do its thing by adding moisture, removing temperature, adding temperature.
I notice on your website you have specialty grains like rye and oats. Do these use the same floor malting process as well?
Yeah, everything that we malt is floor malted. So we do rye, wheat, I mean, obviously we do barley, but we do rye, wheat, oats. We've done some triticale, which is fun. With this kind of new expansion that we just did, we're gonna be have the sort of production slots to be able to play around with some more grains this upcoming year. So that will be fun. But yeah, it's everything's floor malted. I mean, that is definitely part of what makes us very unique. When was the last time that somebody listened to this podcast used it floor malted triticale malt?
It-
You know, I don't think there. It's a pretty unique
yeah.
product. Tastes amazing. It's one of my favorite malts that we have right now. It's got just like a lovely bready cracker toasty that flavor. I don't even, it's florally. It's just delicious.
Are any breweries out there using that right now in a beer that's like widely available, or is it all pretty local for
No,
that?
it's not widely. It's not something that we've seen wide adoption on. Maine Beer Company has done a little bit with that. Um, and there's actually many small breweries. Like we have many customers who've done stuff. So it's hard to call it anyone in particular, but we have seen some distillers also get excited about that. So I think we're gonna I think we're gonna see some more of that coming out locally in our region.
Yeah, you've got a great lineup on your website. Look, and you have an all-star lineup
Yeah,
for
thank you.
breweries that you
We're
work
really
with out there.
excited. One of the things change topics, but one of the things that I've always wanted to do with this is it's about making local grain available for whoever wants to use it. So we definitely have heard from customers that only buy 800,000 pounds of malt a year from us, thank us for giving them the like customer service and making this available where as they don't get the same attention from the big suppliers and the big malt houses that, an Allagash or a Maine Beer Company get, they've got reps knocking on their door. But
Yeah.
it's just awesome to see anybody who wants to use local grain and that's important to them, to have access to it, I think. And so yeah, we work with a range and we work with hundreds of breweries. I mean, one of my kind of philosophies also around that is that local, I don't think local necessarily means better, across the board. And for food, I mean, probably people can think of their own examples with beer, but just because something is grown locally doesn't inherently mean that it's better quality, but I think it can. I think if we really want to support our communities, it has to. And so we really have to create high quality local beer. I mean, I think our job, as I see it, is to help our customers do that. So I mean, we have some great customers who work with us, who create beer. I want to say regardless of whether they work with us or not. And we hope we elevate, and we think we do elevate a lot of the stuff that they do. But even the small brewery that is just a 3, 4, 3, 5 barrel system sells all their beer out of the tap room. We have a team of former production brewers that are there to support those people and help those people, improve their beer, work with our product and, make sure that they're putting out really, really like high quality products themselves. So it's all about, we really want quality to shine in our local products. And I think that's performance, that's consistency, that's flavor.
Have you noticed, like, throughout your time at Blue Ox, like, I remember it was a couple years ago, I was watching a show on, I think it was Netflix called Chef's Table. And the one episode really stuck with me where he was a pizza chef there, but he made it part of his mission. He wanted to get flour and use the grains that were locally sourced. And he just said it was the best in the world and tries to get all the ingredients, the tomatoes and everything. I mean, certain tomatoes you would have to get from Italy, but he made it his point to get the grains from Arizona where he was at. Do you see more and more breweries, or in the 12, 13 years that you've been in existence, if more and more companies started doing that, like caring more where they get their stuff
Yes,
from, if it's local or not?
absolutely. That has been something that we've observed. And a lot of it has to do with the same reason that that chef was talking about, which is flavor, uniqueness of flavor, the concept of terroir. I think terroir is a really interesting thing because it certainly exists in beer, it certainly exists in, the water and the grain, um, you know, the same variety grown in Maine is gonna act differently, taste different than the same, that same variety grown in Michigan or in South Dakota. And, as a brewers on this podcast know, then you're processing it. So, we as maltsters make so many choices about what flavors to bring out. Our process lends so much uniqueness to that ingredient as well. And then the finished product, brewers obviously make, I wouldn't say million, they make dozens of choices more
Yeah.
on how to tease out flavors. So it's really complex. I think when you look at cider and wine, where you're primarily working with a fruit juice and everything historically is just like all tied to that fruit juice, the concept of terroir is an easier one to unpack, but it's really complicated in beer because it's just there's so many aspects and ingredients that go into it. I will say that the so there's definitely that, like with that shift. There's also other reasons why we've really seen an uptake in in our product and focus on local with our customers is because there's this one which everyone expects me to say, which is true, but is expected, which is increasingly the like beer consumer are value driven. You see these younger generations, they really want to support businesses that are aligned with their values. And so one way to, demonstrate your values is to use local grains to advertise that, to tie that, story to your brand. But what we've actually, you know, seen in addition to that, which it has nothing to do with the consumer per se, is that local supply chains are more robust and resilient to global factors. And I joke that, you know, my kind of mission is to build more robust, resilient, and sustainable like food systems in the region. And a more decentralized food system is a lot more stable. And my sustainability background, ecological background is all, supports that. And it was like, and all it took was a pandemic and a war in Russia to prove me right. And we just saw, right in the last couple of years with all the geopolitical stuff happening in Europe and supply getting, shipping and supply just being a little bit more uncertain. We won customers that way. They said we just need to add a local supplier so that if something happens, we're not fully, out, and we're not screwed. So I mean,
Yeah.
we've just seen that too. There's a lot, um, there's a lot more resiliency and stability if you can build a local supply chain for something. And we have customers that are working with us for that reason.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, not only do you make grain and malt for breweries, but also distilleries and bakeries. And distilling, is it picking up to like where craft beer is in Maine, or is that more in the startup phase?
I would say that craft distilling feels to me in Maine specifically. I will say that like I know there's a lot happening nationally with it. And there's actually a lot happening in Maine. I'm not saying that to say that there isn't, because I believe that craft distilling feels to me like it is where craft beer was when I started 12 years ago working on this. I think it's definitely still in the front side of its kind of growth decade. That craft beer just had. And I think we're going to see a lot of that craft as far as it relates to us and like malting. Obviously, distillers, well, maybe not obviously. Again, I don't know how much different listeners know about the distilling process, but you have to make a fermented beverage like beer before you can distill it. But it's all a little bit different on the distilling, their needs. And then there's available commercial enzymes that you really can't use in brewing, but you can use in distilling. So you see those enzymes being used a lot in you've got a lot of corn-based spirits or other product-based spirits. There's not always malted grain in every spirit that you drink, but what's exciting is that for us and for the malted grain side of it is that there's a new category of American single malt whiskey, and potentially it probably has come up on this podcast before, I would suspect. And that is a new category of whiskey that a lot of craft distillers are developing products in. It is has to be all produced in one distillery made with all malted grain. Um, I do think that there are definitions that you can find on the web, and I don't trust myself on the spot to give you the right one. But what's really exciting for us is that we have a distilling customer, Wiggly Bridge, that has been working with us since the beginning of our facility back in 2015, and they sat on the whiskey that they're working with us on for a while, but they've been doing this like single malt American whiskey for a while, and have just actually won some awards for it. I think one of the as at brewing, I know a little more about distilling. I'm still learning a lot about it, and I remember Dave Woods, the distiller and owner, just talking about how he uses one of our more specialty, like higher kilned malts. And one of the reasons he does that for his whiskey is he's like, distilling is a stripping process. So you're removing things, you're not adding anything. And so you having that really high quality ingredient that is giving a lot of extra flavor and character is adding to his whiskey, because he can keep that in there if it's in there, but he can't add it if it's not in there. So he really
All right.
has leaned into that and produces a really delicious product. So we're excited. We are working with some more distilleries too. So we're seeing that has picked up.
Now, you recently expanded. What new capabilities does this added space provide for you? Are you doing different things now that you weren't able to do, say,
We're
6 months ago?
we're doing things that we couldn't do now. We're producing like twice as much
Yeah.
malted plants than we could do
Well, that's good
6
for
months
you.
ago.
Yeah.
We were sort of capped out on our old malting for several years now. So it's been fun to get these larger floors operational, because what we've been able to do is move our pale and our Pilsner malts over to, and in some of our muted malts over to the large systems, and that's freed up this whole system for us to do really fun projects with. So we are, for example, taking a grain from a grower that is just a town over from us, and they don't have very much grain. It might sound like a lot to uninitiated, but they've got like 4,000 pounds. And we're going to be able to take that grain, malt it, and provide it to the breweries that are located in that town or adjacent to it. So they're going to do this like hyper local project. We're really excited about it. That's definitely a project we want to have the production space for if we hadn't opened this up. But we're also doing some really fun other projects. Smoking is one that, again, with the new floors, we've been able to open up time and production space to really R&D with our smoking. So we do a lot of sort of custom smoking projects, and we've got some smoking projects around seaweeds right now, which create these really delicious Unani forward smoked malts. And we just did some Alder smoked malt for a customer, and we're happy to play around with anything. I mean, people always ask if we do a peat. I don't do peat because my background in sustainability is like peat's not a renewable resource, so I don't like to cut that out of the ground. But we're really happy. We're playing with some like waste products from the coffee, the coffee roasting process, and really trying to be creative with that. So that's been really fun. And then the big new piece of equipment that we're just getting sort of going during recording this podcast is our roaster. So in the past, we've done some really fun chocolate ryes and some other really delicious roasting malts. Malted grain tends to catch on fire really quickly, so a lot of coffee roasters don't like to let us roast our grain in in their roasters. So we were producing some roasted malts a few years ago, pre-pandemic, and then the roaster decided that it was a little too dangerous. He was a little uncomfortable. We've been out of roasted malts for several years, but excited to add that back into our schedule. So that's going to be a really fun for us as well.
Oh, it sounds good. Yeah,
Yeah, we don't
don't
want to do
set
that.
the partners on
Uh,
fire. Yeah. Well, Joel, I thank you so much for coming on. This has been fascinating to learn a little bit more about malt, to learn about your company later on in the show. I'm going to have a couple beers from breweries that use malt from Blue Ox. So I'm looking forward to that. Check out Blue Ox Malthouse. Joel, thank you so much again. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Dave. I really enjoyed speaking with you, and I appreciate your thoughtful questions.
All right. The beer that's in front of me now is a classic one from Maine Beer Company. This is Lunch. I've had this on the show before, and it's a great beer, but I wanted to have some beers from Blue Ox and the malt that they provide. So Lunch is one of them. Maybe that's why it's so good. So I'm going to have this, and I'm going to have another one later on in the show. So let's crack open the Lunch. Lunch is a nice, beautiful color here, little darker than your usual IPA. Good use of caramel malts here. It really looks great. Good couple fingers of foam. Smells really good. I get a lot of like citrus here, like grapefruit, maybe some orange in the aroma. It smells really good. Some sweetness from the malt. I can't wait. This is such a great beer. Yeah, that's really good. Well balanced. Like the sweetness hits me up front, and like you get those caramel malts in there, so you get some of that. Then the hops hit you. They use Amarillo, Centennial, and Simcoe hops. This is a 7% beer, and it's just great. And especially, I don't know how old the last one I had was, but since this is only a couple weeks old, it really hits the spot. Yeah, that's just perfect. Like this is something you would have every day. It's phenomenal. I remember Ruby and I were there before I really even heard of them. Like this was probably 8 years ago, and we were there, and you know, you go somewhere, you always gotta Google breweries near me, and this was one of the ones that popped open, so we hit them up, and it was like, "Oh, yeah, this is good. I wish we had this in Chicago all the time." But Lunch is a great beer. If you could pick it up, definitely have to. It's a classic beer. It's well renowned. Everybody loves this beer. You never heard anybody say a bad word about this. So if you see this from Maine Beer Company, you definitely have to put this one in the cart. All right, I wanted to do another beer that utilizes malt from Blue Ox, and what better one to have than Allagash White? This is a highly decorated Belgian white beer. It's probably the one you think of the most It's iconic. It's just a terrific beer. I've talked about it on the show before. It's just a phenomenal beer, and you can find it everywhere. And one of the main reasons why is because it's so good. So let's crack open the Allagash White. This is a Belgian style wheat beer, 5.2% alcohol, and it's brewed with coriander and curacao orange peel. It's just such a beautiful, light, hazy color, but like super bright. Good couple fingers of eggshell foam here. Looks great. And like the foam looks rich and creamy too. Not like something that's going to dissipate. This is something that's going to stick to your mustache. Smells really good. Definitely get like the orange peel and the coriander from the aroma. Just a lovely smelling beer. That's just so good. I mean, there's a reason why you could find this at every liquor store, gas station, grocery store around because it's iconic and it's just so flippin' good. I think for me and my taste buds, the coriander is really like coming through. That's hitting me up front. I get a little of the orange at the end, but that coriander, that really like slaps me up front. And off the subject, but I am one of the 10% that I can't eat cilantro. To me, it tastes like dish soap, and coriander is part of the cilantro family, but coriander doesn't like affect me. Like I could have this and it's fine. This does not taste like dish soap. It tastes delicious. But all right, back to the beer. But no, the coriander really hits me up front. That orange is coming through at the end. It's just a beautiful beer. Finishes well. The foam is still here. It hasn't died down at all. It's just a lovely beer. Like before this came out or before it was available, here in Chicago where I'm from, I remember back in the late 90s drinking Celis White from Pierre Celis. That was distributed here. That was probably my first entry into this style, and I still love that beer. 3 years ago, maybe even 4 years ago, I did a show on that, and I talked to an author about Pierre Celis. That's a great beer. Years ago, before I even started doing this podcast, I went down to Austin because his family opened up a brewery there with allegedly his recipes. And it's such a cool story. If you're a fan of this, you should definitely, if you haven't already, some people are novices. If you're not, if you don't know the story of Pierre Celis, you should look it up because it's a fascinating story. And he was the one that started like Hoegaarden and then brought the beer over here to America. So you definitely, if I'm drinking Allagash White, you need to give a shout out to Pierre Celis, who started this whole Belgian white style. But Allagash is phenomenal. If you see it, and I mentioned you could get it anywhere, put it in the cart. It's just a fabulous beer, and it's made better with Blue Ox Malt. All right, that's going to wrap things up for this edition of Beer in Front. I thank you very much for listening. I want to thank Joel Alex, who's the founder of Blue Ox Malthouse, for coming on and talking malt. So Joel, thank you very much. If you need to get a hold of me, you can email me, dave@beerinfront.com. If you'd like to support the show, please head over to patreon.com/beerinfront, and you could help support the show since I'm flying solo now. Have a great week. I'll talk to you next week. And remember, sometimes the beer in front of you is the best one yet.